I always held the opinion that only Bauhaus could play that, only the four members would play that, and that's why I tried to get them together. I'm not trying to be Bauhaus, but it's my work too.
Peter Murphy was never a rock star in the way the public is used to. He didn't have massive world tours or radio-dominating hits, but his deep, icy voice and haunting gaze opened up an entirely different musical world: Gothic rock. He was the soul of Bauhaus, the band that gave birth to the Gothic genre while the rest of England was still chasing punk. They called him the Lord of Darkness, not because he was fierce, but because he sang for those forgotten in the light. But if you think Peter Murphy was merely a stylish icon of the 1980s, you're missing a far more complex and painful story. He battled depression, was arrested for drug possession, collapsed on stage from a heart attack, and spent decades living in seclusion in Turkey like a Sufi monk. And yet, in 2025, when his health is fading and his voice no longer what it once was, he still released a new album, as if singing were the only way he could stay alive. This is the journey of Peter Murphy. Not just a Gothic icon, but a misfit who dared to walk into the darkness and turned loneliness into something unforgettable. A story no one has ever fully told, until now. Early life. Peter John Joseph Murphy was born on July 11, 1957, in Northampton, an industrial town in the Midlands of England, where most families lived by manual labor and clung to religious faith as part of their identity. The Murphy family was no different. As the youngest of 7 children, Peter grew up in a conservative Catholic household, where there wasn't much room for difference or dreaming. His parents weren't harsh, but they believed in order, in morality, and in silence. They didn't talk about emotions. They didn't ask questions when a child seemed odd. Everything in the house followed a predetermined path, except Peter. Even in primary school, he stood out. Quiet, often staring out the window, sometimes muttering poetry in class that no one understood. School was never a place of connection for him. There he was quiet, withdrawn, and often labeled by classmates as the weird one. Sports were not his strength. Group activities made him uneasy. And the lessons on social order or Catholic discipline only made Peter feel like he was in the wrong place. But what made him suffer silently wasn't rejection. It was the inability to express himself. Peter would later recall that during all his school years, he never felt he could share his inner world with anyone, not even within his family. So he kept everything inside, and as a natural consequence, he began searching for escape, through drawing, through sound, through symbols of metaphysical meaning that others failed to notice. Music didn't come to him through training, but through the radio and silence. Once, riding in the car with his family at around age 14, Peter suddenly said aloud, "I'm going to be a singer." No one reacted. No one brought it up again afterward. But for Peter, it was the first time he clearly heard a voice from within himself. Still, after leaving school, he didn't study art. Instead, he took a job at a printing shop, a monotonous but livable job. During this time, he reconnected with Daniel Ash, a former schoolmate and an imaginative guitarist. Daniel saw something Peter's family perhaps never had: a strange, deep voice, full of emotional tones. They began making music together in a small rehearsal space in Northampton. Peter knew nothing about music theory. He had no formal vocal training, but he had something else, an urgent need to express. And it was that feeling, not methodical, not schooled, not conventional, that laid the foundation for a band the world had never seen before. That band was called Bauhaus, and this was only the beginning. Early career. After leaving school and working at a small print shop in Northampton, Peter Murphy had no clear artistic direction. He didn't study music, didn't have a band, and had never performed on stage. But in 1978, a reunion with his old friend Daniel Ash changed everything. Daniel, a creative, experimental guitarist, was looking for a vocalist for a new music project. Although Peter had no performance experience, Daniel believed his natural voice had something special, deep, cold, and evoking a sense of distance, completely unlike any rock singer of the time. Peter agreed to join. They brought in David J., bass, and Kevin Haskins, drums, forming a band called Bauhaus 1919, inspired by the German art movement of the same name, later shortened simply to Bauhaus. They didn't play punk, nor did they play pop. Bauhaus's music was dark, minimalist, and unbound by traditional structure. From their very first recording, it was clear this band was unlike anything else. The song Bela Lugosi's Dead, recorded just 6 weeks after the band formed, ran over 9 minutes, had no chorus, and almost no predictable rhythm. The lyrics told of the death of the actor who famously played Dracula, delivered in a repetitive, drawn-out vocal style, more like a seance than a performance. At first, no record label wanted to release it, but when a demo was played on John Peel's radio show, the response was far beyond expectations. The track didn't become a chart hit, but it spread rapidly in underground circles. It is now widely regarded as the unofficial birth of Gothic rock. Between 1980 and 1982, Bauhaus released 3 consecutive albums. In the Flat Field, 1980, raw, abrasive, and difficult to digest. Mask, 1981, incorporating electronic elements and experimental sounds. The Sky's Gone Out, 1982, more exploratory, blending jazz and ambient textures. Peter Murphy wasn't the primary songwriter, but he was the band's visual and emotional center. His stage presence was unusual, motionless with a fixed stare, sometimes only lifting a hand or tilting his head, yet hauntingly captivating. His voice wasn't warm or openly emotional. It was cold, distant, as if it came from a place no one else had ever been. That image, paired with ghostly white makeup, spiked hair, and black cloaks, quickly turned him into a style icon for a generation of young artists searching for an escape from punk's aggression and pop's commercial polish. Audiences were either completely drawn in or totally repelled. There was no middle ground with Bauhaus, and that's precisely why they were remembered. Inside the band, tensions began to rise. Murphy gradually became distanced from the other 3 members, who had been close friends long before Bauhaus began. He didn't write music, contributed little to the arrangements, and at times was seen as an outsider within his own band. Though he was the most recognizable face to the public, that status only made internal relationships more fragile. After releasing their 4th album, Burning from the Inside, 1983, during which Murphy was frequently absent due to tuberculosis, the fractures could no longer be hidden. Bauhaus officially disbanded after their final performance at Hammersmith Palais in London, a night that was both symbolic and a definitive end to a short but intense chapter. Peter Murphy walked away with no clear plans for the future. He had no new band, no major manager backing him, but what he did have was a voice no one else could replicate, and a visual legacy burned into the world of Gothic rock after just 5 short years. That was only the beginning. And when he returned, this time alone, the music he brought would reach far beyond the basement shadows where Bauhaus first began. Breakthrough career. When Bauhaus disbanded in 1983, Peter Murphy stepped out of a world he had never fully belonged to, even when he was at its center. With no bandmates, no backing group, and no hit to his name, he began again from scratch, carrying a distinctive voice but also a fixed image. A Gothic icon, the quiet figure standing in the dark. The early years of his solo career were anything but easy. His debut album, Should the World Fail to Fall Apart, 1986, failed to make an impact, and most of the public still saw him more as the former member of Bauhaus than an independent artist. But it was a time of experimentation for Peter, altering rhythms, expanding arrangements, adjusting his vocal style, and, for the first time, learning to command a space that was entirely his own. The turning point came in 1988 with Love Hysteria. The album didn't sound radically different, but it held something the previous records lacked: a Peter Murphy who allowed himself to be more emotional, more accessible, even romantic. All Night Long made its way onto radio with just enough pop sensibility to catch the ear, yet still carried his trademark darkness. It was as if he were testing whether the world could accept a version of himself that could be loved. And when Deep was released a year later, the answer became clear. With Cuts You Up, a track featuring hypnotic viola lines and an unconventional yet addictive structure, Peter Murphy finally had a legitimate hit. It topped the US modern rock charts and marked the moment he stepped out of Bauhaus's shadow under his own name. To American audiences, Peter was no longer just an underground legend. He was a true artist, capable of singing about loss and longing with a serene depth that made people stop and listen. Months-long tours followed, magazine interviews became frequent, and people began to realize Murphy wasn't someone who only belonged in the shadows. He was someone who understood them, had lived within them, and therefore, when he opened himself up, the light felt all the more rare and real. Success continued with Holy Smoke, 1992. But rather than chasing the rising alternative rock wave, Murphy veered in another direction. He recorded Cascade, 1995, with a gentler, introspective, and more electronic sound, as a response to what he felt was the growing noise in mainstream rock. Not everyone welcomed this change, but Peter didn't seem to care. He moved permanently to Istanbul with his wife, choreographer Beyhan Murphy, withdrew from the media, and embarked on a deeper spiritual path. Meditation, study of Sufism, and music no longer made for markets, but for what he believed to be true. Dust, 2002, was the clearest result of this phase. A challenging album, rich with Middle Eastern folk instruments and nearly devoid of rock. Western critics were divided, praising its artistry, criticizing its lack of commercial appeal. But to Peter, it was one of the few times he created something that no longer clung to the past. When he returned with Ninth, 2011, and Lion, 2014, Peter Murphy felt like a man who had completed the full cycle. Once again making rock music, once again standing on stage, but no longer confined to any image. His voice was still there, though less powerful than before. The long, deep notes, sometimes faltering, only made listeners believe more in the reality of the man behind them. Someone who had lived through layers of emotion, not just a relic from a bygone era. In 2025, Peter released Silver Shade. No fanfare, no announcements, no marketing campaign, but within each song was a strange calm, the kind only someone who had endured depression, illness, and a lifetime of making music just to survive could express. The loyal listeners, fewer than before, still called it music only Peter Murphy could make. And perhaps the most remarkable part of his success story is this: that he never allowed himself to become a reduced version of who he was, no matter what the market or nostalgia might have demanded. Personal life. As Peter Murphy's solo career began to stabilize, he also entered a different phase of life, one that most of his contemporaries didn't choose, withdrawing from the center of the music world, avoiding the media, and embracing what he called a life quieter, more genuine. By the mid-1990s, Murphy had moved permanently to Istanbul, Turkey, not to escape, but for love. His wife, Beyhan Murphy, is a renowned contemporary choreographer, a Turkish national, and the artistic director of the country's national dance theater. The two met in the early part of the decade during an art project and have been together ever since. They have 2 children, rarely seen in the media, but Beyhan's presence in both Peter's music and personal life is undeniable. Moving to Istanbul was a major decision. For an English artist raised in a conservative Catholic family, living in a Muslim-majority country was entirely unexpected. But for Peter, it brought a strange sense of closeness, as if he had found something the West had never offered him, a notion of stillness and personal faith. During his years there, Peter studied Sufism, a mystical branch of Islam focused on meditation, music, and spiritual connection. He never publicly converted, nor did he turn it into a branding statement. But in rare interviews, he often spoke of cleansing oneself, not just from the pressures of show business, but from the ego that had kept him locked in the image of the Godfather of Goth. This was also the time when he nearly vanished from the media radar. He did not attend award shows, fashion events, or comment on politics. Peter chose to speak only when he had something worth saying. The album Dust, 2002, recorded entirely during this period, was almost devoid of commercial elements. No catchy singles, no hooks, no marketing campaign. But for those who truly followed him, Dust was a spiritual diary, a body of music written by someone living differently, thinking differently, and perhaps believing in a different world. Of course, not everything was peaceful. Living in isolation also made him prone to misunderstandings, both in the press and within the Gothic rock community, where many fans wanted him to maintain the old image. Some said Peter had become eccentric, distant, difficult to approach. But to those close to him, it was simply a phase he needed to preserve his inner balance. In 2013, Murphy was arrested in Los Angeles for causing a traffic accident and was found in possession of illegal substances. The incident caused a stir, not due to its severity, but because it seemed to contradict the tranquil image he had cultivated. Peter didn't deny it. He took responsibility, entered treatment, and never reoffended. When asked later, he said simply, "People aren't straight lines. We all have turns, and we don't always choose the right one the first time." But that wasn't the only stumble. At a concert in Sweden around 2016, Peter suddenly threw a water bottle into the crowd and walked off stage after a conflict with the lighting technician. Security had to intervene, and the night ended in chaos. There was no formal apology, no official explanation, only speculation, exhaustion, medication side effects, or something deeper he couldn't control. Rumors spread after the incident, that he was battling severe depression, that he lost emotional control during tours, lashed out at staff, or disappeared from rehearsals altogether. Some former collaborators called him difficult, uncooperative, always in a state of refusal, but others saw it differently. A longtime fan wrote after that night, "He didn't act like a rock star. He acted like someone fighting a battle inside." For Peter Murphy, personal life was never meant to be a performance. He didn't talk about his family, didn't share photos of his children, didn't show up with celebrities. Yet for nearly 3 decades, he lived quietly with his wife, raised his children, and searched for a different definition of success. One not based on album sales, but on the ability to keep himself from falling apart amid the constant changes in music and in life. It wasn't an easy life, but clearly, it was the life he chose. And unlike many artists of his generation, Peter has never tried to distance himself from those choices, whether they were right or wrong. Legacy and influence. If one had to name a single person who laid the foundation for Gothic rock, most would point to Peter Murphy. Not because he ever claimed that title, not because he released the most albums or won the most awards, but because he was the first to make darkness a space in music that one could actually live within. With Bauhaus, Peter wasn't just the voice, he was the image. A living statue on stage, pale, motionless, yet holding the entire room in suspense. No screaming, no attempt to seduce the crowd, just a presence that felt ceremonial, as if he wasn't performing, but summoning something deeper within the human spirit. That very style went on to influence a wide range of artists, from Trent Reznor, 9 Inch Nails, Dave Gahan, Depeche Mode, and Marilyn Manson, to Interpol, and even visual K-bands in Japan. Peter's music, both with Bauhaus and in his solo work, was never easy to listen to. It was cold, dark, unstructured, at times seeming to reject the very idea of a song. But because of that, he became a beacon for those living on the margins. For many fans, Peter was not simply a singer. He was a voice for the feeling of not belonging, for loneliness, for the internal conflict between faith and ego, between art and the fear of being consumed by the market. The label Godfather of Goth was attached to him early on, and ever since, it became a shadow he both lived within and tried to break free from. Peter openly admitted he disliked the concept of goth as a fashion trend or a label. To him, what mattered wasn't black clothing or earrings, but the willingness to face sorrow without trying to make it palatable. He never sold records like The Cure, nor did he have the media reach of Joy Division, but Peter Murphy's influence lies in depth, not numbers. His late career acoustic tours, just his voice and a guitar, never sold out arenas, but each audience member left feeling they had witnessed something that could never be repeated. Current life. Peter Murphy has not disappeared. He has simply slowed down and chosen to return through music, not through loud comebacks. After more than a decade of near silence, 2024 marked a musical rebirth for the father of Gothic rock through a series of unexpected but deeply resonant projects, true to who he is. At the end of 2024, he released the duet Let the Flowers Grow with Boy George, a collaboration that seemed unlikely, yet left listeners nodding in appreciation. The song unfolded like a conversation between two survivors of pop and alternative's golden ages, figures who were once icons, who had stumbled and returned not to prove anything, but to say they're still here, still loving, still singing. In March 2025, Peter drew attention again with the release of The Art Room Wonder, a single steeped in nostalgia, created in collaboration with Justin Chancellor, bassist of Tool. In its lyrics, he recalled a lonely boy in an art classroom, connected only to his brushes, canvas, and the kinds of solitude no one else could understand. The song felt like a late confession, an unsent diary entry, and a bridge to something larger. On May 9th, 2025, after 11 years since his last studio album, Peter Murphy officially released Silver Shade, a work critics described as dense, somber, but full of life. Produced by Youth of Killing Joke, the album featured contributions from artists like Trent Reznor and Danny Carey. More importantly, it proved that Peter still had much to say, in the most musical, least confined way possible. Mojo called the album a fusion of post-punk dreaming and spiritual reflection. Spin described Silver Shade as a melodic rebellion, bleak but strangely beautiful. For longtime fans, what mattered most was this: Peter Murphy's voice still carried that same quiet intensity they had always loved. However, shortly after the album's release, Peter unexpectedly announced the cancellation of his entire summer 2025 tour, including dates in Europe and the UK. The reason given: unresolved health issues. No further details, no complaints, just a simple announcement, yet fans understood. Peter never forces anything. If he can't offer a fully present performance, he'd rather step back, silently. Though absent from the stage, he remains present through rare interviews, like the 14-page feature in Record Collector magazine, or the in-depth conversation with Mojo in June 2025. And strangely, in all these accounts, what emerges is a very different Peter. Not the sharp-edged Gothic icon, but a man journeying deep into his own psyche, trying to make sense of himself through each song, each pause. Peter Murphy has never been an easy star to understand. He didn't write music to climb the charts, didn't step on stage to please the crowd, and never tried to maintain an image just to survive in the harsh world of showbiz. He came to music as an outsider, a stranger carrying darkness, poetry, faith, and fractures that never fully healed. From Bauhaus to Silver Shade, from post-punk England to mystical Istanbul, from nights filled with shouting crowds to silent recording rooms. Peter Murphy didn't follow the path of celebrated artists. He followed a path only he could hear calling. He fell, under pressure, into addiction, beneath the weight of his own shadow. But he rose again, not to reclaim the title of goth rock icon, but simply to continue being human, fragile, devout, defiant, and alone, just like the songs he wrote. Peter Murphy doesn't need a tribute show to become a legend. He only needs a microphone, a studio, and an inner world that never learned how to stay quiet. Have you ever heard "Cuts You Up" in the still of night? Have you ever found a part of yourself in his cracked, aching voice? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to pass this along to friends who need to hear it. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video. Goodbye.